Tonight, condemnation and calls for action as Mark Carney stands by a controversial candidate. Why the Liberal leader is letting him run.
This is a terrible lapse of judgment.
After accusations of suggesting supporters cash in on a bounty for his opponent.
May well rise to the level of criminal.
How the defender of the U.S. Constitution is floating a way of defying it by running again.
They do say there's a way you can do it.
With the possibility of global tariff turmoil just 2 days away.
Relatively speaking, we're going to be very kind.
Hundreds of thousands without power, tracking the rush to turn on the lights after a destructive ice storm.
It's just crash, boom, crash, boom, crash, boom.
Plus, what sparked this bench and crowd-clearing brawl? And our cross-country campaign conversations continue.
Now it's the tariffs.
The cost of everything is going up.
The concerns reeling in small-town voters.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening. Housing and pipelines were major issues on the campaign trail today on the start of this new work week. Another, why the Liberal leader continues to stand by one of his candidates who suggested people claim a Chinese bounty on a Conservative opponent. CTV's Judy Trinh starts us off on this day 9 of the election campaign.
The Liberal leader was surrounded by his Toronto regional candidates, except for Paul Chiang.
This is a terrible lapse of judgment by Mr. Chiang. He has apologized.
But it's now Mark Carney's judgment that's under scrutiny for refusing to remove Chiang from the election. In an interview with Chinese language media in January, Chiang urged people to bring democracy activist and Conservative rival Joe Tay to the Chinese Consulate to collect a bounty of 1 million Hong Kong dollars.
Mr. Chiang is a veteran policeman with more than a quarter century of service to his community. 28 years of defending rights in this community, and he will continue with his candidacy going forward.
But sorry isn't enough for Tay. He says Chiang's comments are intended to send a chilling signal to the entire community.
I spoke to him. He's very, very rattled. These comments by this Liberal candidate may well rise to the level of criminal because they called for someone to be turned over to a hostile foreign government on a bounty.
40 democratic rights groups from around the world have now condemned Chiang's remarks, demanding Carney remove him as a candidate. Hong Kong Watch is also calling on the RCMP to investigate if there's foreign interference in this case.
I think the government of Canada has not seized the opportunity to use these cases as examples to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law.
Chiang made his comments in January, but they only surfaced a few days ago, which security analysts say cast doubt on the effectiveness of the Liberal screening process.
You can say you have a vetting process, but saying it doesn't mean you have a good one. What goes behind that? What goes into that? How rigorous is it? Tell us what you actually do when you're vetting a candidate.
There is likely to be more scrutiny of the Liberal vetting process going forward. So far, the party has nominated about 300 candidates out of a possible 343 ridings. Judy Trinh, CTV News, Georgetown, Ontario.
And for more, let's bring in CTV's chief political correspondent, Vashi Capellos. Vashi, the Liberals have obviously made a calculation that their candidate is not a political liability. Why stick with him?
Yeah, it's a great question. I reached out to about a dozen different Liberals on the campaign trail today, and none of them really had an answer. The best case that they could present was essentially one of strategy, that they thought that the Donald Trump headlines to come on Wednesday with all those additional tariffs would subsume the news cycle, and essentially they have some political capital because of where things stand in the polls, and they felt like they could spend it in this instance. Now, I don't think the opposition, however, regardless of what those headlines are on Wednesday, are going to drop away from this, primarily because Carney's opponents, Mark Carney's opponents, think that they've landed something questionable about his leadership, that they're prompting questions about his leadership at a time when the Liberals are doing this well in the polls. It's something they feel is necessary to strike down on, Omar.
All right, Vashi, thank you for this tonight. Well, speaking of polls, let's bring in Chief Data Scientist for Nanos Research, Nick Nanos. Nick, we'll get to how the leaders are tracking in just a moment, but let's start with the two issues the Liberals and Conservatives are using as political ammunition against each other. What are they, and what are Canadians telling you?
It's interesting, Omar. There are two issues that are dogging both of the frontrunners. You know, for Mark Carney and the Liberals, he's being hammered by the Conservatives when it comes to disclosure of his blind trust. And you know, the thing is in a new CTV Globe and Mail survey that we did when we asked Canadians about him disclosing what's in his blind trust, about 2 out of every 3 Canadians were good with him kind of opening things up and explaining what's in the trust. The other thing is Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, him dealing with and being dogged by questions related to why he will not get a security clearance to learn more about foreign interference. In the same CTV News Globe and Mail survey, still, about 2 out of every 3 Canadians were good with Pierre Poilievre going through that security clearance process. The key takeaway, Omar, Canadians have a certain expectation of transparency for both of the frontrunners who are seeking to be Prime Minister.
We are now, of course, in week 2 of this campaign, which began as a dead heat. Where do the leaders and the party stand right now?
Well, right now, Omar, in the latest nightly tracking, the Liberals are ahead. They've been picking up almost a percentage point a day for the last 7 to 8 nights. They're at 44% compared to the Conservatives are at a 36%. The Liberals are teetering on majority territory. And you know what? When we ask about Canadians and ask them who they would prefer as Prime Minister, Mark Carney gets a tip of the hat from about 47% of Canadians, followed by Pierre Poilievre at 33%. The key takeaway, Omar, is that Mark Carney is probably benefiting not just his profile of being Liberal leader, but as being Prime Minister and dealing with Trump. It's going to be interesting to see how the Poilievre Conservatives counterpunch and fight back in order to get back in the game and to be competitive.
All right, Nick, thank you as always for your insight. Mark Carney unveiled what the Liberals call the most ambitious housing plan since the Second World War. CTV's Heather Wright looks at the pledge and how the housing market is reacting.
The Liberals want to double the number of new homes built every year and are repurposing a post-war plan to get it done.
We have solved a housing crisis before in our past. We can solve the housing crisis now.
Under the plan unveiled today, a Mark Carney government would create an organization called Build Canada Homes, essentially a developer that would spearhead constructing affordable housing across the country. The BCH would provide $25 billion in financing to innovative prefabricated home builders in Canada, and another $10 billion in low-cost financing and capital to those who build affordable homes. The Liberals have also previously announced eliminating the GST for first-time home buyers on homes at or under $1 million.
But I thought it was well done. And
Michael Brooks is the head of RealPAC, which represents 130 real estate firms. He says the Liberal plan includes a number of good ideas, but adds there are hurdles to building that many homes, including available land and skilled workers.
we got enough, carpenters and drywallers and electricians and plumbers to do this? No, we don't.
Canada is well behind its goal of building 3.5 million new homes by 2030. And against the backdrop of a trade war, this type of investment could help in a time of economic uncertainty.
Housing supply can be a really effective economic pump primer. It was in Australia, for instance, during the global financial crisis.
Still, there are concerns about whether the government should be in the home building business.
I'm just not sure the federal government moving into the business of building and developing houses. I'm just not sure that's their place.
Last week, the Conservatives promised to eliminate the tax on homes worth $1.3 million or less, while the NDP says they would use suitable Crown land to build more than 100,000 rent-controlled homes in the next decade. Heather Wright, CTV News, Toronto.
And Pierre Poilievre pledged what he called a national energy corridor today to fast-track pipelines and other critical infrastructure with the goal of reducing reliance on the U.S. CTV's Abigail Beeman takes a look at the plan.
Canada first for a change.
He's serving up beer at a New Brunswick campaign stop, but it's energy Pierre Poilievre would like to see flowing.
We need to be able to get our resources across Canada, bypassing America.
The Conservatives announced a pre-approved national energy corridor to build infrastructure like pipelines and rail lines faster.
The government would not have the legal right to reverse course and change its mind. This would remove the uncertainty.
Poilievre says he'll meet with premiers immediately to agree upon a route and promises revenue-sharing partnerships for Indigenous communities.
We already have a challenge getting provinces to agree to, say, an oil pipeline through their territory. Why would it be any easier to get them to pre-approve a blank check?
This oil researcher thinks the corridor is a good idea if it can get done, and says in this moment of boosted national unity in the face of tariff threats, the timing may be right. Quebec, traditionally against pipelines, has signaled a new openness. Liberals are also making corridor campaign promises, offering $5 billion to build infrastructure focused on ports, railroads, and highways. While the New Democrats offered a much different message for the oil and gas sector Monday.
Our plan is about taking away from the highly profitable oil and gas companies and giving to everyday people, to helping out families.
The Conservative announcement comes as Poilievre faces criticism for not changing gears to focus more on Trump. The energy corridor is about making Canada less reliant on the United States. His war room tells CTV News it's not a shift, but something he's been talking about for 10 years, more important now in the face of tariff threats. Omar?
Abigail Beeman in Ottawa. Abigail, thank you. And there will be some relief at the pumps.
Effective midnight tonight, we're going to see a 20-cent drop in average prices.
Earlier this month, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced the commercial carbon tax would be scrapped on April 1st. The move will lower prices across the country, except in Quebec, where there is a provincial cap-and-trade system. Fears over Donald Trump's trade war escalation this week rattled markets once again today, as the president floated the idea of running for a third term. Here's CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Malbin.
I know him as Bob.
The often unpredictable U.S. president with his good friend, Bob, better known as Kid Rock, signing an executive order targeting ticket scalping. But it's Trump's newest tariff blitz that's on his mind.
They're reciprocal. So whatever they charge us, we charge them, but we're being nicer than they were.
Unleashing sweeping new tariffs potentially on all countries in the world. Tit for tat, no exemptions. This as 25% auto tariffs also kick in this week on foreign-made cars and parts, even though half of all vehicles sold in the U.S. are assembled abroad.
Most of the cars have 4 parts coming from Mexico, some from Canada, and some from the U.S. So it's a world economy.
Trump insists tariffs will bring manufacturing back to America. Experts say it will take years, if it happens at all. And economists predict that tariffs will drive up the cost of appliances, groceries, and cars. Trump telling NBC News he couldn't care less if car makers raise their prices. And he's not joking about wanting to serve a third term as president. Even though it's banned in the Constitution, Trump is tempted at taking a run at Barack Obama.
I'd love that.
His third term.
Boy, I'd love that. That would be a good one. I'd like that. No, people are asking me to run, and there's a whole story about running for a third term. I don't know. I never looked into it.
One theory, Trump could run for vice president with J.D. Vance at the top of the ticket in 2028. If he won, Vance would step aside. But amending the Constitution is a heavy lift. You need Congress, the Senate, and a majority of states. And this Republican warns.
I and many would not be open to the idea of Barack Obama running for a third term. And so I think the folks have to be careful here.
As for what Trump calls Liberation Day, he plans to announce his latest round of tariffs at a splashy Rose Garden ceremony on Wednesday. Omar?
Joy Malbin in Washington. The Kremlin says Moscow is still open to working with Washington on possible peace with Ukraine, despite Donald Trump being furious with Vladimir Putin. Trump said he was very angry with Putin for attacking the credibility of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and threatened 25% to 50% tariffs on Russian oil if Putin stands in the way of a ceasefire deal. 3 Asian export powers, Japan, South Korea, and China, will respond to Trump's tariffs as a united front. The comments come after the 3 countries held their first economic dialogue in 5 years over the weekend. And a court ruling in France has barred a far-right leader and major contender from running to become the country's next president. Marine Le Pen is barred from contesting elections for 5 years after being convicted of embezzling European Union funds to finance her National Rally Party. The 56-year-old also received a fine and prison sentence. She says she will appeal. Coming up, how long the cleanup could take in Ontario after a destructive ice storm. Residents in parts of Ontario are cleaning up after a vicious ice storm on the weekend. Power is still being restored after hundreds of thousands were left in the dark. CTV's Sean Leathon looks at the aftermath.
Branches down, power out. And now the work begins from a weekend ice storm hitting much of Ontario.
Well, it got bad Friday night and we lost a lot through the night, and then Saturday as the day went on, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse till, you know, basically every tree fell that could fall.
Over 48 hours, freezing rain building up along trees like this street in Barrie. Eventually, those branches started coming down.
Watching a slow motion train wreck, because it happened over about 48 hours, just crash, boom, crash, boom, crash, boom.
Yeah, quite the phenomenon, just watching branches drop in every single direction and wonder if they're going to land on somebody's car, land on somebody's house.
This house in Northwest Barrie is covered after branches fell from a century-old tree in the front yard.
Scary. We were all wondering, is this going to go through the roof? Are we protected? Are we safe?
Today, Irene Spalvieri is taking pictures for her insurance and trying to find help to remove the branches.
I'm phoning different companies to try and get the roof fixed, but everybody's busy dealing with this.
Across the city, crews are working to restore power while residents work to assess the damage.
That's part of my woodlot there.
Joseph Chakralis had trees crash through the fence in his yard. He says all they could do was hunker down and wait while trees fell.
Do you guys have power right now?
We don't have power.
Any idea when it's coming?
It's supposed to be Wednesday.
According to Hydro One, as many as 360,000 customers had been affected by early Monday, as states of emergency were declared in Orillia, Muskoka, and Peterborough, while crews work, municipalities open help centers for those with prolonged outages.
48 hours with no power for many folks, and certainly devastation when it comes to our trees around the city, the roads, and the parks.
While the thaw began in Orillia today, many residents are entering their third day without power.
Oh, it's cold. It's only 12 degrees in my house.
Back in Barrie, residents are working to clear roads where city crews have yet to begin.
Just clearing off enough of the brush so that cars can get through and the school bus can get through.
The mayor here saying it could be 4 to 6 weeks before all roads are cleared. Sean Leathong, CTV News.
Overseas, the death toll continues to climb after the 7.7 earthquake Friday in Myanmar, where officials now say more than 2,000 people were killed. Aerial footage shows the scale of the devastation at a condominium complex in the city of Mandalay. And as the critical 3-day window for rescue efforts closes, incredible stories of survival are emerging. A woman 5 months pregnant carried out of the debris, a child freed by Chinese rescue teams, and 2 girls filming the agonizing hours they were trapped under a collapsed hotel with their grandmother before they were freed. In China, where the earthquake was also felt, nurses in a maternity ward clutched babies in their arms as the hospital shook. Still ahead. To back. What's so special about the new bat taking over Major League Baseball? Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey took a personal stance on Donald Trump's persistent calls challenging Canada's identity on an interview with CNN.
My daughter was born in Baltimore. She's a natural citizen. She could be president of the United States someday. Obviously, I married an American. I have all my children are dual citizens. So it's confusing and hurtful for me as an individual. But Canadians at large are incredibly offended.
Und darum bin ich so dankbar über Kanada. And at a trade fair in Germany, Chancellor Olaf Scholz took some shots at the U.S., saying his country stands with Canada and warning against what he called a misguided path of protectionism. And quite the scene, tensions flaring both on and off the ice during a senior hockey league championship in Miramichi, New Brunswick. Players broke into fist fights that continued on their way back to the dressing rooms. Fans of the two teams also clashed in the stands. Police are now investigating. The NHL has struck a massive new deal for TV rights with Rogers. The Associated Press reporting it's for 12 years and worth $7.7 billion US, or about 11 billion Canadian. The long-term deal begins in the 2026-27 season.
High fly ball, left field. Churio back, track, wall, see ya. The bat worked.
And the New York Yankees hit 15 home runs in the first 3 games, tying a record, thanks in part to a new torpedo-shaped bat customized to each player to concentrate the wood on where the most contact is made with the ball. And in case you're wondering, they are also perfectly legal. Still ahead, taking our campaign conversations to the Canadian town known as the lobster capital of the world. If you've ever traveled to New Brunswick, chances are you've been to the Giant Lobster. It's in the town of Shediac, where CTV's Sarah Plowman is talking to voters about more than just fishing.
About 20 minutes northeast of Moncton, this is Shediac. Hugged by Parley Beach, with a lobster as its landmark, a summer escape for many, a slower pace of living for those here year-round. When it's still snowing, there aren't as many people in this town that's packed during the summer. To find voters, we went to several businesses. At this restaurant, seafood is served with a large selection of games. These ones stood out as we asked patrons what the next Prime Minister's priority should be.
And now it's the tariffs. It has to be the priority.
In the kitchen, the cooks shared concerns about the cost of living.
Cost of food, cost of utilities, cost of everything is going up, but the wages aren't, and it's just...
At a cafe across the street, this retired nurse wants better health care.
We're just not getting the care that we need, and that is really sad.
A few tables away, voters want a government they can trust and a leader who will stand up to Trump.
And have his own voice and strength and be respected by Trump, because I think there are those that would not be respected by Trump.
On the wharf, commercial fishermen say the next government needs to include them in talks about the future of the fishery.
We've been put aside by DFO.
At the local lobster shop. Is there a main issue that matters to you most?
Just for Canada to stay united, I would say.
A mix of priorities as they look to cast their votes. Sarah Plowman, CTV News, Shediac, New Brunswick.
And that's a snapshot of this Monday. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Good night, and see you tomorrow.